300 years ago, Earth was dying. The oceans were poisoned. The air was thick with smoke. Billions of people fought over the last clean water and the last patches of land where food could grow. Wars burned across every continent. Children starved in the streets. Old people died in their beds with no medicine to save them. Humanity had made too many mistakes, and now they were paying the price. No one in the galaxy cared. Earth was a small planet around a small star in a forgotten corner of space. The great empires had seen species die before. It was sad, perhaps, but it was not their problem. Resources were precious. Why waste them on a dying world? But the Villani were different. They were a small species, soft-skinned and gentle, with large dark eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the universe. They had no great military, no vast empire. Their home system orbited a dying star, and they knew that one day they too would need to find a new place to live. They were traders and farmers, not warriors. The galaxy mostly ignored them. When their scout ship passed through Earth's system, they could have kept going. The humans had nothing to offer. No advanced technology, no rare minerals, no strategic value. Helping them would bring no profit and no advantage. But Elder Toril, captain of that small trading vessel, looked down at the blue and brown planet and saw something that others did not see. He saw children. He saw mothers holding babies. He saw old men teaching young boys how to fish in dirty rivers. He saw a species fighting to survive against impossible odds, and he made a choice. The Villani shared everything they had. They gave humanity their farming technology, which could grow food in poisoned soil. They gave them water filters that could turn toxic sludge into clean drinking water. They gave them the coordinates to 3 moons in distant systems, where humans could build new homes. They asked for nothing in return. When the human leaders asked why, Elder Toril simply smiled with his sad, gentle eyes. One day, he said, "Perhaps you will remember us kindly." Then the Villani left, and humanity never saw them again. But humans did not forget. The technology saved billions of lives. The colony coordinates gave humanity a future among the stars. Within 50 years, the first human ships reached those distant moons. Within 100 years, Earth itself began to heal. Within 200 years, humanity had become a proper spacefaring civilization, with colonies on dozens of worlds and a fleet of warships to protect them. And in every school, in every colony, children learned the story of the Villani, the strangers who came when no one else would, the gentle people who saved humanity for no reason except kindness. It became more than history. It became something holy. Commander Yuna was working late in the communication center when the signal came. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and short black hair. 20 years in the fleet had taught her to recognize every type of transmission in the galaxy. But this one was different. The encryption was old. It's very old. It took her computer 3 full minutes to decode it. When the message finally appeared on her screen, her blood went cold. It was a distress call. From the Villani homeworld she ran, Fleet Admiral Tay was an old man now. His hair had turned white, and his hands shook slightly when he held things. But his mind was still sharp, and his eyes still burned with the fire that had made him the youngest admiral in human history. His office was simple: a desk, some chairs, a window that looked out at the stars, and on his desk, in a small glass case, sat a water filter. It was ancient, rusted in some places. It had belonged to his grandmother, who had been a little girl when the Villani came to Earth. She had kept it her whole life, and when she died, she gave it to him. "Never forget," she had told him. "Never forget what they did for us." He never did. When Yuna burst into his office with the decoded message, Tay listened without speaking. The Villani homeworld was under attack. The Kareth Dominion, the most brutal empire in the known galaxy, had decided to take their territory. The Villani had no weapons, no allies. The Galactic Council had refused to help. They had 6 days before the Kareth wiped them out completely. Yuna finished her report and waited. She watched the old admiral's face, trying to read his thoughts. He sat very still for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the water filter. "How many ships can we send?" he asked quietly. Yuna blinked. Sir, how many ships? All of them. Every warship we have? Admiral, the Kareth fleet is 3 times our size. If we send everything, we leave our colonies unprotected. If we lose... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. If we lose everything, Tay agreed. I know the math, Commander. I have known it my whole life. He stood slowly, his old bones creaking. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Do you know what my grandmother told me before she died? Yuna shook her head. She told me that when she was 5 years old, she was dying of thirst. There was no clean water anywhere. Her mother had already died. Her father was too weak to move. And then a strange ship came down from the sky, and a creature with big sad eyes gave her a cup of water. Just a cup. But it saved her life. He turned to face Yuna. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. The Villani saved my grandmother. They saved my mother. They saved me. They saved all of us. And now they are dying, and they have no one to help them. He walked back to his desk and pressed the button that connected him to every ship in the fleet. This is Fleet Admiral Tay. All vessels, all stations, all personnel. Mobilize immediately. We are going to war, Yuna stared at him. Sir, the Council will never approve this. The other species will think we are insane. Tay picked up the water filter and held it gently, like a father holding a child. Let them think what they want, he said. 300 years ago, strangers saved us when no one else would. Now, it is our turn. Mobilize the fleet, Commander. We have a debt to repay. The order went out across human space. On Earth and Luna and Mars, on the colony worlds of New Sol and Port, Inshin and Far Busan, on space stations and mining outposts and research facilities. Everywhere humans lived, they heard the call, and everywhere they answered. The Villani were dying, but humanity was coming, and humanity always paid its debts. The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest room in the known universe. It floated in space at the center of neutral territory. A massive sphere of glass and metal where representatives from 47 species gathered to discuss the fate of worlds. Here, wars were started and ended. Alliances were formed and broken. The most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in their assigned seats and made decisions that affected trillions of lives. Today, they were all staring at a single human woman. Ambassador Hannah stood at the center of the chamber. Her hands clasped behind her back. She was not tall. She was not physically impressive. She wore a simple black uniform with no decorations except a small pin on her collar, showing Earth rising over a blue horizon. But when she spoke, her voice filled the entire room. The United Earth government has decided to intervene in the Villani crisis, she announced. Our fleet is already moving toward Villani Prime. The chamber exploded. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen languages. Translators struggled to keep up. The council speaker, a massive creature with 4 arms and scales like polished stone, slammed his staff against the floor until the noise finally died down. Ambassador Hannah, he said, his voice like grinding rocks. Do you understand what you are saying? You are declaring war on the Kareth Dominion. For the Villani, yes, Hannah said simply. The Villani have no strategic value, no military power, no resources worth fighting over. The Kareth fleet outnumbers yours 3-1. By every calculation, you will lose. Probably, Hannah agreed. The speaker leaned forward, his forearms spreading wide in confusion. Then why? Why throw away your fleet? Why sacrifice your soldiers? Why risk everything for a species that can give you nothing in return? Hannah smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. 300 years ago, she said, humanity was dying. We had destroyed our own planet. We had no hope, no future. And the Villani came. They did not ask what we could give them. They did not calculate the strategic value of saving us. They simply saw people in need and chose to help. She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. They gave us water when we were thirsty. They gave us food when we were hungry. They gave us a future when we had none. And they asked for nothing in return. Nothing except that we remember them kindly. Her voice grew harder, sharper. Well, we remember. And now, when the Villani need help, we will not sit in comfortable chairs and calculate whether they are worth saving. We will fight. We will bleed. We will die if we must. Because that is what humans do when someone they owe comes calling. The chamber was silent. No one knew what to say. Finally, the representative from the Methrin Confederacy spoke up. He was a tall, thin creature with silver skin and eyes like black pools. "This is madness," he said. "Emotional foolishness. The Kareth will destroy you, and then they will be stronger than ever. Your sacrifice will mean nothing." "Perhaps," Hannah said. "But at least we will be able to look at ourselves in the mirror. Can you say the same?" She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response. Across human space, the mobilization continued. On Earth, factories that had been making civilian ships switched to building weapons. Workers who had never held a gun volunteered for combat training. Old veterans who had retired decades ago put on their uniforms one more time, on the colony world of New Sol. A young man named Ben said goodbye to his mother. He was only 19 years old, barely old enough to serve. His mother held his face in her hands and cried, "Why?" she asked. "Why must you go?" Ben thought about the stories he had heard as a child, the stories of the gentle strangers who saved humanity when no one else would. "Because someone has to," he said. "Because if we do not go, who will?" His mother hugged him tight. She knew she might never see him again, but she also knew that he was right. On the space station above Mars, an old pilot named Day climbed back into a cockpit for the first time in 15 years. His hands were not as steady as they used to be. His eyes were not as sharp. But when the call came, he did not hesitate. "I flew in the border wars," he told the young pilots around him. "I have killed and nearly been killed more times than I can count. But this is different. This is not about territory or resources or power. This is about honor. This is about paying back a debt that is 300 years old." The young pilots listened. They were scared. They knew the odds. But when Day finished speaking, every single one of them volunteered for the most dangerous missions. On the flagship Sol's Promise, Captain Jiho addressed his crew. He was a serious man with a calm voice and eyes that had seen too much death. He stood on the bridge, surrounded by officers and soldiers who trusted him with their lives. "In a few hours," he said, "we will jump to Villani space. We will face a fleet 3 times our size. Many of us will not come back. I will not lie to you about that." He paused, looking at the faces around him. "But I want you to understand why we are doing this. We are not fighting for land. We are not fighting for money. We are fighting because 300 years ago, strangers showed us kindness when we deserved nothing. They gave us a future. They gave us hope. And now they are dying and they have no one else." His voice grew stronger. "The galaxy thinks we are fools. They think we are throwing our lives away for nothing. But I say there is no greater cause than this. There is no better reason to fight. There is no more honorable way to die." He raised his fist. "We are humanity. We remember, and we repay our debts." The crew cheered. The sound echoed through the ship, through the fleet, through human space itself. 200 warships prepared to jump. 200,000 soldiers made peace with their gods, far away.
Oh.
In the command center of the Kareth Dominion fleet, Warlord Dren received reports of the human mobilization. He was a massive creature, covered in thick armor plates and scars from 100 battles. He had conquered 9 species. He had never lost a war. When his officers told him about the human fleet, he laughed. "They are sending their entire military to save a worthless planet," he said. "This is not courage. This is stupidity. We will crush them, and then we will take their worlds too." His officers laughed with him. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned. They had no chance. But deep in his chest, in a place he would never admit existed, Warlord Dren felt something strange. Something he had not felt in a very long time. It was the smallest seed of doubt, because in all his years of conquest, he had never seen a species throw everything away for strangers. He had never seen soldiers march to certain death with smiles on their faces. He had never faced an enemy that fought not for survival, not for profit, but for something as strange and terrible as gratitude. The humans were coming, and for the first time in his life, Warlord Dren wondered if he truly understood his enemy. Vellani Prime was burning from space. It had once been a beautiful world. Blue oceans sparkled under gentle suns. Green forests covered the northern continents. White clouds drifted peacefully across the sky. The Vellani had built their civilization carefully, taking only what they needed, living in harmony with their planet for 10,000 years. Now, fire rained from the heavens. Kareth warships hung in orbit like hungry predators, their weapons tearing holes in the planet below. Cities that had stood for centuries turned to ash in minutes. Farms that had fed millions became craters of black glass. The Vellani had no weapons that could reach the ships. They could only hide underground and pray, in a shelter beneath the capital city. A young Vellani woman named Mira held her grandmother close. The old woman was frail now, her large dark eyes clouded with age. But she had been alive when Elder Toril was still young. She remembered the stories he used to tell about a small blue planet and the strange creatures who lived there. "They will not come," Mira whispered, more to herself than to her grandmother. "No one ever comes. We are alone." Her grandmother reached up and touched her face with a trembling hand. "The humans will come," she said softly. Toril always said they would. He said he saw something in their eyes. Something different. Myra shook her head. Tears ran down her face. "That was 300 years ago, grandmother." "They have forgotten us. Everyone forgets." Above them, the bombardment continued. Each explosion shook the shelter. Children cried. Mothers held them tight. The Vellani waited for death, and then the sky tore open, 200 human. Warships burst out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They appeared like ghosts, like angels, like vengeance made real. At their head flew the flagship Soul's Promise, her hull gleaming in the light of the Vellani sun. On the bridge, Captain Jiho stared at the planet below. Even from orbit, he could see the fires burning across the surface. He could see the Kareth fleet, 600 ships strong, arranged in a killing formation around the helpless world. "Open a channel," he ordered. "All frequencies." The communication officer nodded. "Channel open, Captain." Jiho spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every ship in the system. "Arith, Dominion vessels. You are firing upon friends of Earth. The Vellani are under our protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." For a long moment, there was silence. Then a harsh, grinding laugh filled the bridge. "Human Captain," Warlord Dren's voice boomed over the speakers. "I admire your courage. But courage does not win battles. You are outnumbered 3-1. Your ships are smaller than ours. Your weapons are weaker. You cannot win." "Perhaps not," Jiho agreed calmly. "But we did not come here to win. We came here to pay a debt. Then you came here to die." Jiho smiled. It was not a kind smile. "We shall see." The battle began. The first wave of Kareth ships surged forward, their weapons blazing. Human destroyers moved to intercept, shields flashing as they absorbed the incoming fire. The destroyer Inchin took the lead, her captain roaring orders as his ship dove straight into the enemy formation. "Target their engines," he shouted. "Disable as many as you can before they reach the main fleet." The Inchin's guns tore into a Kareth cruiser, ripping through its armor. The cruiser spun out of control, crashing into another ship behind it. But more were coming. Always more. Within minutes, the Inchin's shields failed. Enemy fire punched through her hull. Half the crew died in the first explosion. The captain, bleeding from a wound on his head, refused to retreat. "Ram them," he ordered. The helmsman did not hesitate. The crippled destroyer accelerated, her engines screaming, and slammed into the nearest Kareth battleship. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from the planet's surface. It was only the beginning. All across the battlefield, human ships fought with a fury that defied logic. When their shields failed, they kept fighting. When their weapons were destroyed, they used their ships as weapons. When they were dying, they made sure to take as many enemies with them as possible. Lieutenant Yoon was 23 years old. She had joined the fleet right out of school, dreaming of adventure among the stars. She had never expected to die for strangers she had never met. Her fighter was small and fast, designed for quick strikes against larger targets. She had already destroyed 3 Kareth gun platforms when a lucky shot tore through her engine. Her ship was dead in space, drifting toward the enemy lines. The smart thing to do was eject. Wait for rescue. Stay alive. But ahead of her, she could see a Kareth dreadnought moving into position to fire on the Soul's Promise. If it fired, Captain Jiho would die. Half the human command structure would die. EU and made her choice. She manually overrode the safety systems and pointed her dying ship at the dreadnought's bridge. The thrusters were still working, barely. She pushed them to maximum. "This is Lieutenant Yoon," she said into her communicator, her voice steady and calm. "Tell my mother I love her. Tell her we remembered." Her ship hit the dreadnought at full speed. The explosion ripped through the enemy vessel, killing the captain and 2,000 Kareth soldiers. The dreadnought fell out of formation, its weapons going silent. On the Soul's Promise, Captain Jiho watched the explosion. He did not look away. "Note her name," he said quietly. "She will be remembered." The battle raged on. Hour after hour, the humans and Kareth tore at each other. The Kareth had numbers and firepower. The humans had something else. Something that could not be measured or calculated. They had stubbornness. When a human ship lost power, its crew would redirect everything to weapons and keep firing until the reactors exploded. When human pilots ran out of missiles, they would crash their ships into enemy targets. When human soldiers were wounded, they would prop themselves against walls and keep shooting until they could no longer hold their guns. The Kareth had never seen anything like it. "Why won't they die?" A Kareth officer screamed at his commander. "Why won't they stop?" Warlord Dren had no answer. He had conquered 9 species. He had broken 100 armies. But he had never faced an enemy that simply refused to accept defeat. After 6 hours of fighting, the humans had lost 80 ships. The Kareth had lost 120. By any rational measure, the Kareth were still winning. They still had more ships, more guns, more soldiers, but they were afraid, because the humans were still fighting. Still dying? Still coming. On the surface of Villani Prime, Mira emerged from her shelter to look at the sky. She could see the flashes of explosions in orbit. She could see the burning wreckage of ships falling through the atmosphere like meteors. "They came," she whispered. Her grandmother had been right. After 300 years, after everyone else had abandoned them, the humans came, and they were dying for the Villani. In the shelter behind her, her grandmother smiled. Her old eyes, clouded with age, looked up at the burning sky. "Toril knew," she said softly. "He always knew. The humans never forget, and they always pay their debts." Above them, the battle continued. More ships fell. More soldiers died. The debt was being paid in blood, and the galaxy watched in silence, wondering what kind of species would sacrifice everything for strangers. 9 hours into the battle, Admiral Tay stood alone in the command center on Earth. The room was dark, except for the screens that covered every wall. Each screen showed a different part of the battlefield. Each screen showed death. Human ships burning. Human soldiers dying. Human sacrifice, offered freely to strangers who lived among distant stars. His hands were shaking. Not from age this time. From grief, 112 ships destroyed, 40,000 lives lost. The names scrolled across the screens, faster than he could read them. Officers, pilots, engineers, medics, sons and daughters who would never come home. General, who stood behind him. His face grim. "Admiral," he said carefully, "we have proven our point. The galaxy has seen what we are willing to do. Honor has been satisfied. We can order a retreat. Save what remains of our fleet. Tay did not turn around. How many Volani have been saved? He asked. Wu checked his datapad. Our ships have evacuated approximately 40,000 civilians from the surface, mostly from the coastal cities. How many Volani remain on the planet? A pause. Approximately 800 million. Tay closed his eyes. 800 million people. Mothers and children. Old people and young. 800 million souls waiting to die because no one would help them, except humanity. No retreat, he said quietly. Not until the job is done. Admiral, if we lose the entire fleet, we leave our colonies defenseless. The Kareth could turn on us next. We would lose everything. Tay finally turned around. His eyes were red from tears he refused to let fall. General, when I was a boy, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the Volani. She told me how they came when no one else would. How they gave us food and water and hope. How they asked for nothing in return. He walked toward the window and looked up at the stars. She made me promise before she died. She made me promise that if the Volani ever needed help, I would be there. I would not turn away. He placed his hand flat against the glass. I am an old man now. I have lived a good life. I have served my people well. And when I die, I will face my grandmother again. I will look into her eyes. And I will tell her that I kept my promise. His voice grew hard. No retreat. Not today. Not ever. In orbit around Volani Prime, the Soul's promise was dying. Captain Jiho had lost half his crew. The ship's shields were gone. The weapons were failing. Fire burned in 3 decks. Emergency teams fought desperately to keep the reactor from exploding. But through the smoke and chaos, Jiho saw something. The Kareth flagship was exposed. Warlord Dren's vessel had moved forward during the battle, eager to deliver the killing blow. Its escort ships had been drawn away by human attacks. For one brief moment, there was a clear path. Jiho knew it was a trap. He knew the Kareth wanted him to attack. He knew his ship could not survive the assault. He did not care. Remaining ships, he said into the fleet communicator. Focus everything on the enemy flagship. This is our chance. This is what we came for. Across the battlefield, 47 human ships answered. They were all that remained of the once proud fleet. Cruisers, with half their weapons destroyed. Destroyers leaking atmosphere. Fighters held together by nothing but hope and stubbornness. They formed up behind the Soul's promise and began their final charge. Warlord Dren watched them come. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the finest warriors the Kareth Dominion had ever produced. His ship was the largest in the fleet. The most heavily armored, the most deadly. He should have felt confident. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt something cold crawling up his spine. They know they cannot win, one of his officers said, confusion in his voice. Why do they keep coming? Dren had no answer. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen this. Species fought when they had hope of victory. They surrendered when they knew they were beaten. That was the natural order. That was how the galaxy worked. But the humans did not surrender. They did not retreat. They did not stop. They just kept dying. Far across the galaxy, species who had refused to help were watching. The Methrin Confederacy. The Oryx Republic. The Vellum Alliance. They had calculated the odds and decided that helping the Volani was not worth the risk. They had made the logical choice, the safe choice. Now they watched human ships burn, and they felt something they had not expected to feel. Shame on a Methrin colony world. A young officer named Keth stared at the battle footage playing on his screen. He saw human pilots crashing into enemy ships. He saw human soldiers fighting until their last breath. He saw a species throwing away everything for strangers they had never met. He turned to his commander. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "request permission to join the battle." His commander shook his head. "The council has decided. We will not intervene. The council is wrong." Keth stood up straight, his silver skin gleaming in the light. "If the humans can die for strangers, what excuse do we have for living as cowards?" Across Methrin space, similar conversations were happening. On ships and stations and colony worlds, officers and civilians alike watched the humans die and asked themselves the same question. What excuse did they have? The first Methrin cruiser jumped to Villani space without authorization. Then another. Then a dozen more. On the Oryx homeworld, a retired admiral pulled his old ship out of storage. "I have lived too long to watch this and do nothing," he said. His crew, all volunteers, agreed. On a Vellum medical station, doctors and nurses loaded their ships with supplies and pointed them toward Villani Prime. "We cannot fight," their leader said, "but we can heal. That is something." One by one, ships from across the galaxy began arriving, on the bridge of his dying flagship. Captain Jiho saw the newcomers appear on his screens. Methrin cruisers. Oryx destroyers. Vellum medical frigates. Species that had refused to help, now racing to join the battle. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice trembling, "we are receiving messages from the incoming ships. They say they could not watch anymore. They say if humans can die for strangers, so can they." Jiho laughed. It was not a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had given up hope and found it again. "Tell them welcome," he said. "Tell them that Villani thank them. Tell them humanity thanks them." He looked at the Kareth flagship growing larger on his view screen. "Tell them to follow us in." Warlord Dren watched in disbelief as more ships kept arriving. The battle he had already won was slipping away. The victory that had seemed certain was turning to dust. "This is impossible," he growled. They were neutral. They refused to help. Why are they here now? No one answered. No one knew, but deep in his heart, Dren understood. The humans had done something that weapons and tactics could never do. They had shown the galaxy what courage looked like, what honor looked like, what gratitude looked like, and the galaxy had responded. The final assault began. Human ships led the charge, followed by Methrin cruisers and Oryx destroyers. They swept toward the Kareth flagship like a wave of fire and steel. Dren ordered his fleet to protect him, but it was too late. Too many of his ships were damaged. Too many of his officers were dead. The enemy was everywhere, and they were not stopping. The Soul's Promise fired its last missiles. Captain Jiho watched them streak toward the enemy flagship, knowing that his ship would not survive to see them hit. "It was an honor," he said to his crew. "An honor to serve with you. An honor to die with you. An honor to pay humanity's debt." The missile struck. Warlord Dren's flagship erupted in flame, and across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the most feared warlord in history fall. The Kareth fleet ran, for the first time in their empire's history, the mighty Dominion Retria. Ted. Their ships scattered into hyperspace like frightened animals. Leaving behind the burning wreckage of their flagship and the body of Warlord Dren, they had come to conquer a helpless world. They left as broken survivors of a battle they never understood. The galaxy held its breath and watched them go. Above Villani Prime, the remaining ships drifted in silence. Human vessels, Methrin, cruisers, Oryx destroyers, Vellum frigates. They floated among the wreckage of friends and enemies alike, their crews too exhausted to celebrate, too stunned to speak. Of the 200 human warships that had jumped into battle, 47 remained. Many of those were damaged beyond repair. They would never fly again. 40,000 human soldiers were dead. Their names would fill monuments on 100 worlds. Lieutenant Yoon, Captain Jiho, Engineer. Sue, Pilot Day. Medic Nari, Private Kim, and Sergeant Park, and 1,000 others whose faces would be remembered in statues and songs and stories. Told to children at bedtime, they had paid humanity's debt in blood. On the surface of Villani Prime, the fire slowly died. The bombardment had stopped. The sky, which had burned with death for days, was finally quiet. And from the shelters and bunkers and underground caves, the survivors began to emerge. Mira climbed out of the shelter that had protected her and her grandmother. The city around her was ruined. Buildings she had known all her life were nothing but rubble. Streets where she had played as a child were craters filled with ash. But overhead, where the enemy ships had hung like hungry predators, there was nothing but empty sky. She fell to her knees and wept. Her grandmother emerged behind her, moving slowly on old legs that had not walked in days. She looked up at the sky, at the distant flashes of ships still burning in orbit, and smiled. "They came," she whispered, "just like Toril said they would. They came." Within hours, human shuttles began landing on the planet's surface. They carried food and medicine and clean water. They carried doctors and engineers and soldiers who had survived the battle. They carried hope. Private Bin was among the first to land in the ruined capital. He was only 19 years old. He had joined the fleet because he wanted to make a difference. He had watched friends die in the battle. He had held a pilot's hand as she breathed her last breath in the medical bay of a damaged cruiser. Now he walked through the ruins of an alien city, handing out supplies to people he had never met. People who spoke a language he did not understand. People who looked nothing like him. But when they took the food and water from his hands, they cried, and when they cried, he cried too. Mira found him near what had been the city's central plaza. He was helping an old Villani man load supplies onto a cart. His uniform was dirty and torn. His face was pale from exhaustion, but he was smiling. She walked up to him and stood there, not knowing what to say. "How do you thank someone who crossed the stars to die for you? How do you repay a debt that was paid in blood?" "Why?" she finally asked. It was the only word she could manage. "Why did you come?" Bin stopped what he was doing. He looked at her for a long moment, thinking about the question. Thinking about his mother back on New Sol, who was probably crying right now because she did not know if he was alive or dead. Thinking about the stories he had heard as a child. Thinking about the friends he had lost 300 years ago, he said slowly, "Your people looked at us and saw something worth saving. We were dying. We had no hope. And your people came anyway. They gave us food and water. They gave us a future. They asked for nothing in return." He reached down and picked up another box of supplies. "We did not forget. We could never forget. And when we heard you needed help, we could not stay away." He looked at her with tired, honest eyes. "We came to return the favor. That is all." Mira stared at him. Then she did something she had never done before. She stepped forward and hugged him. She held this strange creature, this human who had traveled across the stars to save her people. She wept against his shoulder. Bin held her gently. He did not speak. Words were not needed. 3 days later, Ambassador Hannah returned to the Galactic Council. The chamber was different now. The representatives who had once looked at humans with confusion and pity now looked at them with something else. Fear, respect, wonder. Hannah stood at the center of the chamber, just as she had before the battle. But this time, no one interrupted her. "You asked us why we would wage war for a species with nothing to offer," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "Now you have your answer. Humanity does not measure debts in resources or strategic value. We measure them in kindness, and we repay them in blood if we must." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. "Let this be a lesson to the galaxy. If you show humanity cruelty, we will remember. If you show humanity compassion, we will remember that too. And when the time comes to repay what we owe, nothing in the universe will stop us." The chamber was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, the council speaker rose. His forearms spread wide in a gesture of respect. "We have watched your people die for strangers," he said. "We have seen courage beyond anything we thought possible. The council formally recognizes humanity's sacrifice. The Villani are under galactic protection from this day forward. No one will threaten them again." Anna nodded. "Thank you. But we did not do this for recognition. We did it because it was right." She turned and walked out of the chamber, just as she had before. But this time, no one laughed at her. No one called her a fool. They watched her go in silence. On Villani Prime, the rebuilding began. Human engineers worked alongside Villani workers to clear the rubble and construct new buildings. Human doctors treated the wounded. Human teachers helped Villani children learn to smile again. In the capital city, they built a monument. It was a simple thing. A pillar of white stone, reaching toward the sky. On its surface, carved in both human and Villani languages, were the names of every human who had died in the battle. 40,000 names. 40,000 souls. At the base of the monument, they placed a single object. An old water filter, rusted and ancient. It had belonged to Admiral Taze's grandmother. He had sent it to Villani Prime after the battle, with a simple note attached. "This saved my grandmother's life. This saved my mother's life. This saved my life. Keep it safe." Remember what it means? Every year on the anniversary of the battle, humans and Villani gathered at the monument. They came from across the galaxy. Veterans who had fought in the battle. Children who had been saved. Leaders and workers and teachers and doctors. They shared a simple meal. They drank water. And they remembered. Across the stars, a new phrase entered the common language of the galaxy. It was spoken in council chambers, in trading posts, and military academies. It was taught to children and whispered by old people remembering the past. Debt of the humans. It meant a promise that would be kept. A kindness that would be repaid. A warning to those who would harm humanity's friends. A hope to those who would show humanity compassion. The Kareth Dominion never recovered from their defeat. Their empire, built on fear and conquest, crumbled in the years that followed. Other species, inspired by humanity's example, began to stand up against them. The great dominion that had once conquered 9 species faded into history, remembered only as a cautionary tale, and on 100 worlds and 1,000 languages. They told the story of the humans who crossed the stars to save strangers. They told of Admiral Tay and Captain Jiho and Lieutenant Yoon. They told of soldiers who died with smiles on their faces. They told of a species that measured honor in blood and repaid kindness with sacrifice. Mira became a historian. She spent her life recording the story of the battle and the debt that was paid. When she was very old, she would sit with children gathered around her feet and tell them the tale one more time. "The humans never forgot," she would say, her large, dark eyes shining with memory. "They remembered what we did for them, even when everyone else had moved on. And when we needed them most, they came. They did not ask what we could give them. They did not calculate the cost. They simply came." She would smile then, the same gentle smile that Elder Torel had worn 300 years ago. "That is what it means to be human," she would say. "They remember, they repay, and they never, ever break their promises." The children would listen with wide eyes, and when they grew up, they would tell the same story to their children, and their children would tell it to theirs. The story of the debt, the story of the sacrifice, the story of humanity, and the galaxy never forgot.